get started in a moment. Give everyone another sort of 30 seconds. But to those who are in, hello and welcome along. Today we're going to go over a really interesting topic actually and dive into demedicalising neurodiversity. So looking at rebranding ADHD, and we have a very special talker with us today. Meet the speaker. So this is Liss. Liss, I suppose pass over to you to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. So hi everyone, I'm Liss and I am autistic ADHD with a few other learning difficulties as well. And I work as a specialist study skills tutor for students in receipt of DSA, as well as being a public speaker and consultant on neuro-inclusivity in higher education. So I'm a bit all over the place. I have a lot of different roles and I'm here to talk about particularly ADHD today, but things might cross over into other territories. I can get ranting, I can get tangenty. Stop me if I do.
Amazing, thank you. So in today's webinar, if we can work on it, there we are. Like you mentioned, you've got a whole sort of a lot of hats that you can wear in terms of what you talk about and what you've sort of experienced. But I think today what we're going to jump into is what a breakdown of ADHD actually means, and explore the history of it. We'll have a look into why moving away from the medical model of ADHD is pretty much essential, and then discover how Present Pal can support students with ADHD and other learning differences as well. So what I will do is pass over to you, Liss. I'll just go on mute, but I'll access the chat. If there are any questions, guys, feel free to shoot them in as we go through. We've got a bit of time for a question and answer at the end, so we can get them all answered then for you. But yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant. So I'm sure that, and I'm sure based on the fact I get a lot of questions about this title, but I'm sure that there is quite a few questions about the title, rebranding ADHD and what that actually means. So what we're going to be talking about today is the name ADHD itself and unpacking it and kind of understanding where it comes from, what it's good for, what it kind of perpetuates, because language is really important. It's the thing that we understand everything through. We know what a bungalow is because we know what a house is. We know what a house is because we know what a building is, if that may, not to go on a tangent. But when we think of language and the labels we use to describe something, it's really important that we kind of unpack what that actually means and it doesn't give us any false perceptions of what it means. So ADHD is an interesting one. I could probably do this about any condition, but we're going with ADHD today. Can I have the next slide, please, Joe? So ADHD has had a lot of names in the past going through the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is used to diagnose pretty much everything to do with the brain under the sun. So before we had the DSM, there was a lot of colourful labels that were used to describe ADHD. Some of my favourite, including minimal brain damage, behavioural disability, which is sometimes still used incorrectly, but it is sometimes still used, and witchcraft. We were very likely to be accused of being witches in the past. Us, well, autistic people and ADHDers were always accused of being witches in the past. We then got an introduction of what kind of evolved to become ADHD in the DSM-2, which was hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. You'll notice there that it was specifically to do with childhood. ADHD wasn't diagnosed in adults until a lot later. We then had the very snappy name, attention deficit disorder with or without hyperactivity. Yes, very brandable. And then the DSM-3 was then revised, and that's when we got attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is what we kind of know today. From the DSM-4 onwards, which was from sort of the mid-90s, we have had three types of ADHD. So ADHD with inattentive presentation, which was previously called ADD, ADHD with hyperactive presentation, and ADHD with combined presentation, which is what I have. So I'm inattentive and hyperactive. A joy to have in class. Can we have the next slide, please? So, in terms of what ADHD is, I'm going to go through what each of the words that make up ADHD actually mean first, so we can kind of understand why those words have been chosen, because in some ways it's not a very fun reason. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, to me, ADHD is kind of like life with everything playing at the same volume. Everything feels kind of not loud as in like there's actually sounds in your head, but everything feels of equal importance. To me, completing a master's dissertation feels just as important as walking the dog and playing Mario Kart and taking the bins out and finishing this presentation this morning. Everything feels at the same volume. The way I like to describe it to people without ADHD is if you were in a Zoom call and every single person turned their microphone on, you'd hear someone's dog in the background, usually it's mine. You'd hear someone's husband shouting up the stairs asking them what they want for tea. You'd hear some students walking past someone's office. And that's kind of what ADHD is like. You can't really filter out one thing, everything kind of feels at the same volume. Um, so yeah, it's I kind of don't want to get across that it's like that there's actually noise in your head, because it's not necessarily that. It's just like you can't discern between different thoughts. Can I have the next slide, please? So if we go with hyperactivity first, that last one was inattention. It just wasn't on the slide for some reason. That's ADHD. Hyperactivity is a pretty misunderstood word, in that a lot of people, when you're asked to picture a very hyperactive person or someone with ADHD, hyperactive presentation, I bet there's a lot of people who would sort of imagine a young boy running around a classroom causing chaos, that sort of thing, someone who's very outwardly hyperactive. Whereas actually, it can be quite internal, and this is why a lot of girls and women and non binary people tend to be diagnosed later with ADHD, because our hyperactivity is kind of in our heads. It's kind of just like bees in your head running around everywhere, and it feels a little bit chaotic. I'm not necessarily hyperactive in the sense that I'm bouncing off the walls. I'm sure my partner would disagree. He's actually in the chat. Um, and it is kind of just more internal, whereas maybe the stereotype would be someone flapping about all over the place and moving a lot and that sort of thing. I am doing that right now, so I'm not making my point very well because I am in some ways a walking stereotype. But hyperactivity, yeah, it's important to recognize it's not just the outwardness of it. Can I have the next slide, please? So the problem is with seeing inattention as basically having a lack of attention and hyperactivity as being outly hyperactive is that ADHD as described is not necessarily ADHD as experienced. If we look at the diagnostic criteria and the name ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's suggesting that we have a lack of attention completely, whereas actually our attention's all over the place. It can't really focus on one thing, but it's there. In many ways, I would argue I have too much attention, so attention deficit doesn't really fit there. And hyperactivity as well, it's something that has been included in that acronym because it's such a visible thing in a lot of young boys who were considered the stereotype of ADHD. And something I've noticed in my travels is that the main traits listed in the diagnostic criteria and in that acronym is often just a list of the things that inconvenience people around us the most. So teachers, parents, what is getting on their nerves the most. They're the things that are most likely to get you an ADHD diagnosis. Um, I actually got diagnosed when I was 23, which is wild because I was a massive inconvenience to everyone when I was younger. So it's a little bit strange that those traits that maybe we don't feel as much in ourselves, especially late diagnosed people and women and girls, they're the things that are listed as the most important things about ADHD. They don't really consider how we feel inside, and it can lead to a lot of things: guilt, shame, secondary mental health diagnoses like depression and anxiety, OCD, PTSD. All these things are things that people who are late diagnosed with ADHD tend to be diagnosed with first, because doctors would rather diagnose 12 different mental health conditions, in my case, than give a woman an ADHD diagnosis. Can I have the next slide, please? Brilliant, thank you. So if we look at here at the ADHD iceberg, this is a really nice image. I found it on Instagram, but I found it so secondhand on so many different posts that I can't actually find the original creator, unfortunately. If someone knows it, please let me know, because I'd like to credit them. I use it all the time. So at the top of that iceberg, the things that you can see and the things in the diagnostic criteria and the medical sort of psychiatric perception of ADHD are basically trouble focusing, so attention deficit, and fidgeting, hyperactivity. But actually, what ADHD really is all those things underneath. So we have the word ADHD because it's easier to say ADHD than it is to say I have a condition where I have difficulty managing relationships, financial problems, sensory processing issues, anxiety, uncontrollable fidgeting, hyperfixations, mood swings, all or nothing, poor sense of time, trouble recalling commonly used words, etc., on and on and on. And that's why we have the term ADHD. But I think the most important thing to get across is that looking at it and just taking it as at face value and taking attention deficit and hyperactivity literally is actually kind of discounting all these things. So the medical model of disability, what is really prioritizing is assumptions based on visible behaviors, like the hyperactive little boy running around a classroom, so, or like people just getting distracted by a squirrel, that sort of thing. And it doesn't really acknowledge the traits which are most challenging for us as ADHDers. So we actually go unrecognized a lot in support. It took me a while to find the right tutor and mentor through DSA for me, because a lot of them had a face value understanding of what ADHD was, or their experience was mainly around dyslexia. And so it was really difficult finding someone who actually could unpack rejection sensitive dysphoria with me. Honestly, all these terms here, I can and have gone into each one in separate webinars. So there is a lot there to kind of unpack with it all. But if you have any questions about any of those terms on the bottom of the iceberg, those are the things that really affect us the most, but they're not recognized in that acronym. And so they're not recognized in support at all. So I think it's really important that we start to recognize these and unpack them just as much as inattention, which tends to be the thing that gets the most attention, ironically, at higher education level and when we're doing needs assessments and stuff like that. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I've actually listed here the three traits that I consider to be the most sort of challenging for me as someone with ADHD. One of those being executive dysfunction, which I like to kind of describe as if your brain has a boss, so the executive of your brain, the executive who makes everything function, um, but they have to, instead of outsourcing to dopamine, which is lower levels of dopamine is in the ADHD brain, because we don't create enough dopamine, which happens to be the reward hormone, sorry. um, that executive has to do a lot of things itself, and it gets very overwhelmed. It can't outsource it to employees like other people's brains. And there's a lot in executive dysfunction that can be unpacked, but it affects working memory, it affects time management, organization, loads and loads of things, half of the stuff on that iceberg. And lower levels of dopamine, that's what medication can help with, creating certain levels of dopamine that are kind of sustainable. And we've also got rejection sensitive dysphoria, which a lot of people kind of see as a fear of rejection. And it's really not. It's a fear of possible rejection or perceived rejection. So, for example, if my husband said to me, I'm not mad at you. No matter how many times he says, I'm not mad at you, I promise I'm not mad at you, I will still think he's mad at me. When I used to work in care, I would see my manager's name on the rota on the same shift as me and get worried that she was just on the same shift as me because she wanted to tell me off, that sort of thing. And just even the perceived rejection of, maybe if we look at university students, a lot may not go to tutorials with their tutors or their dissertation supervisors because they have a fear of the rejection that may come with that. So these three things are personally for me the most challenging, but they're not represented in the ADHD acronym. It doesn't really give too much detail into that. And I think it's really important when you are thinking about ADHD to unpack all those things and not just take that acronym at face value. Can I have the next slide, please? I think that might have been the last one. Yes.
Amazing, thank you. I think
Okay.
it's really interesting because there's, like you said, there are so many things that are part of, or can be part of having ADHD that, like you say, just completely go uh, unsupported effectively with kind of the kind of support you can get out of sort of having ADHD. So what I wanted to do was open up any questions. I'm sure there's probably quite a lot in the chat. Um, so I'll open up for 30 seconds or so. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you before jumping into to sort of present, pal. We've got Sandra saying how it was a really interesting presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give it 30 seconds or so. But what we will also do is recheck the questions in sort of 5-10 minutes just before we do end, after I've been into some of the present pal stuff, so that if there are any that you can think of, it's always the way whenever I'm trying to think of questions, I can never do it on the spot, and then I'll move away, end the call, whatever it is, and then go, should have asked that. So if that is the case, there will be plenty of time for asking questions. Oh, Niels mentioned, what techniques do you use to, as it's popping all through, what techniques do you use to help counteract the issues?
So that's one of the tricky things. I think the problem is there isn't a silver bullet for any of these things. A lot of my students do come and kind of really want to counteract all those challenges and work in a neurotypical way and kind of just get rid of anything to do with ADHD. But it's not something that's going to happen. At the end of the day, ADHD is still a disability, and the most important thing is having that understanding, which is why I wanted to do this topic in particular. It's really important that people have a genuine understanding of what students are facing, because a lot of the time they don't understand it themselves. And I think if you can just kind of help them unpack little bits of things that kind of are barriers to learning, like, for example, rejection sensitive dysphoria is a massive one in students not accessing support because they're scared of disappointing the people they're getting support from. It is just about actually showing that you have that understanding, that you're on their side, and that you're not going to try and undo any of the things that make them them. I would hate to have students kind of think I was trying to make them a model student of a neurotypical idea of what a model student was. So one thing that we like to do in my sessions with a lot of students is acknowledge that certain things are never going to change. One of them being that we were just talking about TikTok before this webinar started. ADHD students are kind of perpetually on TikTok. I personally won't let myself have it, but one thing that we have tried to do is actually say, look, you don't have to banish your TikTok time. Spend 10 minutes on it on a morning, but look at like study with me videos, or look at videos that are tidying the desk and stuff like that, and that can really help them get in the mood to study and sort of romanticize it a little bit. So you're not getting rid of that coping technique. It's not a good coping technique, but you're just sort of reducing the stress it can cause. It's one I'll go a bit more into in the next webinar, actually, in terms of actually finding techniques. But yeah.
Amazing. No, thank you for and hinting at that as well, which is good. We've got a slide to go over that a little bit later. There have been questions flying in, lots coming through. People asking for any advice for or tips for study skills tutors, for lecturers. Have you got any thoughts on that? I know you kind of touched on it slightly a moment ago, but if there was anything specific or more that you could
Absolutely.
add to that.
So I think the big thing is just believing students, particularly for lecturers. It is really difficult. One of the most difficult things around ADHD is the fact that a lot of our traits and a lot of the things
Oh, I don't know if that's
a
from me.
neurodevelopmental disability you have. And so I think it's really important that we actually consider everything to do with just understanding. That's the most important thing. Believe them, because the thing is with having ADHD, we're so used to being told we're lazy, that we're just unorganized, that we're not trying hard enough. Most of our school reports, it should be a diagnostic feature of ADHD, to be honest. A school report saying they have potential but could apply themselves a bit better, and that's one of the most difficult things, to be honest. So yeah, it is an interesting one. I haven't figured out how to kind of give blanket advice for every student with ADHD, but I think part of it, and again, I'll go into this a bit more with the next webinar, all these questions link over quite nicely. It is just the main thing is understanding, and understanding from the point of view of people with ADHD. Learn about ADHD from ADHDers rather than learning about it from some psychiatrists who wrote down some traits like 60 years ago, who didn't really know what they were talking about.
Amazing, thank you. What I'm going to do is that there are still lots of questions coming in, people really interested in talking to you a little bit more. Is ask you to jump into the chat if you'd like to. Feel free to answer some of the ones in there. I'm going to jump into some of the Present Pal slides now, just because I'm conscious of time. But there's like I say, guys, plenty of opportunity to ask questions in the chat, in the Q&A, whichever you sort of prefer to do. I know Ben's handling the Q&A as well, so we won't miss any of the questions in there. But yeah, feel free to fire as many questions in. And thank you, Liz, for answering so many. I know it's such a it's a topic that you're passionate about, but it's also a really interesting topic for people to understand and learn more from. As you can tell from the chat, people are really interested in understanding and learning more. So, like I said, we'll jump into Present Pal now and how Present Pal can support students with ADHD and other learning differences as well. There are lots of challenges. I know you kind of mentioned a few, and there are some on the screen now. Again, not an exhaustive list by any means, but just a few that we tend to come across when we're working with students. So task initiation paralysis, for example, is the idea of starting an essay or a task and having that blank page and almost that stopping you from getting started. Impulsivity, maybe diving in too much into a topic you're quite passionate about and going off onto tangents or something like that might be something that people experience, and then having to try and pull themselves back is I see you laughing, Liz. That's something that you also mentioned as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite a big one, but again, challenges that students really do have. And Present Pal can support with all of these really. There's a number of different features for those who haven't seen Present Pal before. Not going to be doing a sort of a long live demo today. We don't really have too much time for that, but what I can do is go over just some key areas where we can support. And if you did want to learn any more about Present Pal at all, we can set up a bit of a secondary session to go through that if you'd like to. So some of the key features that Present Pal uses to support students, we've got checkpoints. So as you're going through your notes, you can tick off the bullets that you're going through, making sure that you've discussed that point and made sure that you've gone through everything. But the checkpoint's there to help minimize that distraction and almost guide you through your presentation. You're using it as a step-by-step guide. Point one, tick once I've discussed it. Point two, tick once I've discussed it. You can see the bullets on the right-hand side of the screen there. So that's where you would sort of, I suppose, put in the structure of your presentation as you're going through it. We've got two features called Lessons and the Presentation Planner, both of which give presenters a place to start with their presentations. If you jump into lessons, there's lots of ways to improve your soft skills on presenting, but also you've got the Presentation Planner, which provides you with key pieces of information and key packs of tailored content to actually support you and sort of get started. It's there to really overcome that task paralysis. Like I mentioned before, having that blank page anxiety and not knowing where to start is often a really big challenge. So just supporting students with getting them started, getting them set up in the right way so that they can actually sort of complete this mammoth task that might be a presentation. And we've also got our integrations as well with PowerPoint and with Google Slides. So for those who don't know, PresentPal integrates with PresentPal integrates with PowerPoint and with Google Slides for those slideshow presentations that you might have. And it's there to really reduce that cognitive load of presentations, making sure that you've got all of the control over everything that you need to do in terms of your slides and your presentation, because it can all mount up to be a really big worry. You've got a clicker in one hand, you've got your notes in the other. We want to remove all of that and have everything just in PresentPal there to support students. And like I say, really reduce that cognitive load. I did mention that we weren't going through everything today, and Liss did hint to the fact that we've got another webinar in September. So we are going to be doing part 2, where we're going to go over the reality of ADHD and a late diagnosis in that. So a lot of kind of what you were asking in the chat will be answered in some of in the future webinar. But I know that there are a lot of questions in there, so we're going to spend some time jumping into that now. What I did want to do before we go is just thank everyone for joining us before we go through the questions, and say that I'll be sending over CPD certificates for everyone that's joined, and coffee vouchers as well for all those who have attended. So you can have a coffee maybe the next time you join us in September. You can have a coffee on us and come back and learn a little bit more. But wanted to thank you, Liss, before we all go and answer any more questions. And yeah, thank you ever so much. It's really interesting, and you can, as you can see from the chat, everyone's really sort of engaged and keen to find out more. Oh, I don't know if that's my internet froze. I'm hoping not. I'm seeing lots of thank yous, so I think that means people are hearing. What we'll do is go through any questions, but again, thank you all for attending so much. And yeah, look forward to seeing you soon. We've got some questions here. There's procrastination, how to make it productive. Some students find it really difficult to get started.
Oh, yeah. So I actually have a method called positive procrastination, which is kind of alluding to the fact that rather than eliminating procrastination completely, there are ways that you can make it work for you. So, something I like to do with students is go through a bit of a framework of things they can do in maybe 5 minutes at a time, maybe things we can do in a session together when I'm with them as a study skills tutor, um, that will help them get started and help get rid of that blank page the night before the deadline, but isn't putting the pressure on them to do loads and loads of work right then. I think the thing is with ADHD is we are very interest driven. There's three things that kind of drive an ADHD brain. If you remember that acronym ICE, that stands for interest, compulsory, or emergency. So a deadline counts as an emergency. That's one of the things that will get us doing something. But there's also interest and compulsory. For example, I have to turn up to work or I will not get paid and I will be homeless, and that's no fun. So that's compulsory. That's something that drags me to study skills sessions. Luckily, two of those things have counted today. So compulsory and interest have dragged me along here today. And they're the three things that really gets us going. So it's about finding that with your ADHD student and seeing how they can use either that interest, compulsoriness, or emergency to tap into that motivation, because it's just not going to work without it. They need to have one of those three things active in order to complete a task. If it's not there at all, there's certain things we can do, even if it's just bullet pointing together. And when the emergency kicks in, at least they're not staring at that blank page. They have got something to go off. I like to use things like templates and um, just sort of just guidelines and stuff that we can put in a document. So by the time the deadline comes, there's still like 2,000 words down, and they just have to make it sound academic, which I also work with them to do. But that's all based on quite a complicated framework. But I am happy to take questions about that via email if anyone wants to get in touch.
Neil's put love the ice idea, and Hikara's put love the term positive procrastination as well.
Thank you. It'd make a great podcast name.
Yeah, definitely. Ellen said, love it, so helpful. So yeah, I mean, thank you ever so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to sort of the next one as well. I think it's been great to go through a lot of stuff, and everyone has been super interested. Sandra's put, how do we get your email address? I don't know if you want to drop that into the chat potentially for people
I'll
to
do
access.
that right now. Is my
But what I
keyboard
can also
working?
do is, oh, sorry, I was going to say, what I can also do is I can send
If
out the
Nick's in the
recording.
chat, can you put it in? Can you put my email in the chat, please, Nick?
I believe he was, I think. I think I just saw the name. So yeah, what we'll do is send out the recording to everyone that's attended. The CPD certificate will be sent out as well. All you have to do is complete the form, and you'll get your CPD certificate and your copy voucher as well. And then yeah, I can also follow up when I'm sending that out with your email as well, if you'd like this, just so that everyone's got it, to make sure that
I've
it's
just
out there
put it
as
in
well.
now.
Perfect. Well,
There we
yeah,
go.
thank you once again. And I know we've sort of run a couple of minutes over there, so thank you all for staying with us and for joining us. I'm glad you've all had a great session, and yeah, look forward to seeing you all on the next one.